I remember the first time I heard the forest breathe. It was late, later than I should have been alone, and the fog hung low, curling around the trees like slow-moving smoke. My campfire had burned low, flickering weak shadows across the damp ground. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped, soft but deliberate. I thought it was an animal at first, but the way the silence swallowed the sound right after, that didn't feel right. The wind seemed to carry whispers, words I couldn't quite understand, rustling to the pines of the patience that unnerved me. My flashlight cast a pale circle, trembling in my hands, and I thought I saw a figure just beyond its edge, shifting with the trees. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination, but the closer I listened, the more the forest felt alive, watching. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing back at me. And then, just as I leaned back against a tree to calm my nerves, I saw it. A shadow, too tall, too wrong, staring at me from the dark. That's when I realized I wasn't alone, and I never should have built this fire. The night settled over the pines like a heavy blanket. Cold, still, too still for early autumn. I stood on the narrow trail, watching a thin ribbon of pale light slip between the trees. The moon hid behind drifting clouds, but the fog glowed faintly, curling around my ankles, brushing my legs like cold fingers. I breathed in wet earth. Sap, damp leaves crushed under my boots. The forest didn't feel empty tonight. It felt awake, listening. A soft rustling moved behind me. Not quite footsteps, not quite wind, just enough to tighten something deep inside my chest. I kept walking, slowly, each step swallowed by the fog. The branches above creaked with a dry complaint, as if warning me, or calling out to something deeper in the dark. My breath slid out of me in thin clouds. They drifted toward the trees, then broke apart, like something unseen passed through them. I paused. The path looked different now. Thinner, narrower, as if the trees had leaned in while I wasn't looking. A faint humming drifted across the trail. Soft, low, almost like someone trying to breathe a tune into the air. I turned. Nothing. The humming stopped the moment my eyes shifted. The silence that followed felt wrong, too smooth, like a polished stone with all its edges rubbed away. I swallowed. My throat felt tight and dry, even in the damp. The fog pressed closer. I could feel it against my arms, cool and heavy, like it wanted to settle into my skin. I lifted a hand and brushed it away, but it only folded back, rearranging itself in slow shapes. Shapes that didn't quite fade. Shapes that felt like they were watching. A branch snapped somewhere behind me. Another, too evenly spaced for an animal. My pulse climbed, steady but high, each beat loud in my ears. I didn't run. I didn't even speed up. Something about the air made rushing feel dangerous, like it would draw attention from whatever was pacing me just out of sight. The pines leaned overhead, tall shadows blotting out parts of sky. Their needles whispered softly, shifting even though no wind touched my face. The humming started again, closer this time, right behind me, and then not. I turned again. Fog, trees, a stillness that looked posed. The shadows between the trunks moved, not quickly, not sharply, but with slow intention, stretching long across the ground, stretching farther than any branch or figure should reach. I blinked. They held their shape, like they had paused, waiting for me to notice. A shiver climbed my spine, cold at first, then hot, then cold again. My fingers felt weak. I tucked them into my sleeves, letting the fabric brush my skin, just so I knew I was still here, still solid. The forest floor shifted underfoot. Soft pine needles. A thin crunch of something old and brittle. I smelled something faint, not rot, not soil, something metallic, like the inside of a coal pipe. The humming rose again, barely there, threading between the tree trunks. It drifted left, right, behind, ahead. No direction made sense. It felt like the forest itself was exhaling a tune. I tried to speak, just a quiet breath of a word, but my voice stuck. My throat refused. The fog thickened, swallowing the edges of the trail. My legs brushed low branches that hadn't been there before. The pines arched inward, forming a narrow corridor that wasn't part of the path I knew. I stepped forward anyway. One soft crunch. Then another. A shape flickered at the edge of the fog. Tall, thin, motionless. I froze, my breath stilled in my chest. The shape leaned, not toward me, but slightly to the side, as if listening to something deeper in the forest. The humming cut off. Silence dropped, heavy and sudden. My ears rang with the absence of it. The shape didn't move again, but the shadows behind it stretched, slowly filling the space between the trees, merging with the fog like ink swirling in water. A cold line traced the back of my neck. Not touch, not wind, just presence. I stepped backward. The fog parted around my foot, then closed in again, sealing the space as if it hadn't been disturbed. My heartbeat grew steady again, slow, too slow, like something was smoothing out the fear instead of letting me feel it. The shape faded. The shadows flowed back to their places. The pines lifted slightly, as if straightening their posture. I stood alone on the trail. The humming did not return. The rustling quieted. Even the branches above seemed to hold their breath. I took one step forward, then another. The fog loosened around my legs, softening into thin strands. The air warmed just a touch, enough to ease the tightness in my throat. The trail widened again, and though the forest still watched me, though the silence still felt too perfect, there was a sense of something receding, something slipping back beneath the pines, waiting for the next night, the next breath, the next person who walked too far into the fog. I exhaled slowly, calmly. My footsteps barely touched the earth as I moved on, and behind me, deep among the trees, the humming started again, soft enough that I might have imagined it. Night settled around the campsite in a thick, breathing fog. Cold air wrapped itself around my shoulders. Even though the fire still burned in front of me, autumn always carried a bite, but this felt sharper, quieter. I pulled my jacket closer and watched the flames rise in thin, trembling lines. They reached upward, stretching as if trying to touch something above us, something hidden in the heavy, clouded dark. The fire crackled weakly. Each spark felt too small, too soft against the weight of the night. I leaned closer, letting the heat brush my face. But even the warmth couldn't settle the unease moving through my chest. My breath came out slow, drifting like pale smoke toward the trees. The fog shifted at the edge of the light. Not enough to see clearly, just enough to know it wasn't still. I blinked, thinking maybe the flames were playing tricks on me, but the shapes in the fog didn't sway like branches. They held still, tall, quiet, watching. A faint static crawled along my skin, like the moment before a storm breaks. A prickling that made me sit up a little straighter. Another flicker rolled through the fire, stretching shadows across the dirt. The shapes leaned in, or the shadows leaned toward them. I couldn't tell. I rubbed my eyes. The smoke stung a little, warm and sharp against my eyelids. When I opened them, the shapes were gone. Only the fog, only the pale glow of the fire. I tried to steady my breath. Slow in, slow out. But something tightened underneath my ribs, a small knot of curiosity twisting into fear. The fire sputtered again. A soft hiss, a small pop. The flames bent sideways, as if pushed by a hand or a breath that wasn't mine. The light dimmed for a second, barely a heartbeat. In that moment, I saw a face in the firelight, not formed by smoke, not carved by flame. A face, still, gray, tilted slightly as if listening. I blinked hard. Ash drifted up. The face dissolved into orange sparks. I stared at the place where it had been. My heartbeat thumped slow and heavy, like it had sunk deeper into the ground beneath me. The fog thickened again at my sides, rising higher than my knees, curling around the logs near the fire. Warmth and cold pressed against me at once. A strange, dizzying mix that made my stomach tighten. I felt alone, not unobserved, just alone in a way that made the night seem bigger than it should be. The fire flickered again. Another face, different this time, eyes deeper, jaw sharper, then gone. I swallowed. My throat felt scratchy, like the fog itself had settled inside it. I whispered a question into the empty space in front of me. Not loud, not meant for anything to answer. Nothing answered. The silence felt thick enough to touch. A rustling moved across the ground, just beyond the fire's reach. Soft footsteps, dragging lightly over the dirt. Not fast, not threatening, just present. I turned my head toward the sound. Only fog stared back at me, white and endless. The fire dimmed once more, flames shrinking low before rising again with a hollow gasp. A burst of light shot upward, bright enough to paint the inside of fog. And there, inside that thin second, I saw them. Shapes, for maybe 5, tall as the trees, standing far too still. Their outlines flickered with the flames, as if the firelight could barely hold them in place. Faces formed and vanished with each shift of orange. Eyes that weren't eyes. Mouths that didn't move. I blinked. Hard. The shapes snapped back into the fog, melting like shadows touched by water. My breath shook in my chest. I pressed my hands against my knees, feeling the dirt, the cold grit, the realness of it. It helped. A little. The fire settled into a steady burn. Soft. Almost gentle. Like it didn't want to draw attention anymore. The rustling faded. The heavy stillness returned. The fog softened, no longer twisting, only drifting. The night breathed again. I stared into the flames, waiting for another flicker, another face. But the fire held steady, warm and calm, as if nothing had ever changed. As if the moment had only been a trick of light, a mistake in the smoke, a tired mind seeing what it shouldn't. I laid one hand near the fire, feeling its heat, grounding myself in the small circle of safety it offered. The fog lifted slightly at the edges. The shapes did not return, not in the fire, not in the dark, but the silence carried a weight now. A quiet promise, a slow reminder that the night around me was not empty, not watching the way I understood, not gone, just waiting in the pale light, outside the reach of the flames, where faces could form and vanish between one blink and the next. Winter crept in early that year. Cold mornings, silent evenings, a thin frost clinging to everything like breath that never faded. I walked along the narrow trail just before dawn, the pale light barely touching the ground. The air tasted sharp, almost metallic, filling my lungs with a biting chill. The trees stood stiff and brittle around me, their branches coated in white. Fog drifted low, curling around my boots, soft strands brushing against my ankles. And then I saw them, footprints, clear, bare, pressed deep into the frozen dirt. Too large to be mine, too smooth to be anything wild. Each one glistened with frost settling into the ridges of skin that shouldn't have been there. I knelt beside one. My breath floated over it, forming a faint cloud that settled into the print like it belonged there. I reached out, hesitating just before my fingers touched the frozen impression. Warmth still lingered at its edges. Not heat, just a faint softness, like the air had been disturbed moments earlier. A rustling drifted through the trees. Soft footsteps, not near, not far, pacing in slow circles around me. I stood. The frost under my boots cracked sharply, loud in the quiet morning. The footsteps stopped. Silence spread across the woods, thin and hollow, pressing against my ears. I took one step forward. The frost crunched. Somewhere behind me, another step answered. I froze. Even my breath felt too loud. When I moved again, slow and careful, the answering step came with perfect timing. Not rushing, not dragging, just mirroring. I glanced over my shoulder. Mist, trees, nothing else. But the presence was unmistakable. A patient gaze resting somewhere behind the fog. Aware, watching. I quickened my pace. The frost brightened under the rising light, glowing faint blue around the edges. My breath pushed out in pale bursts, each one shaking a little. The matching footsteps followed. Soft, too soft for the size of the footprints I'd seen. The trail narrowed between two leaning pines. I squeezed through, brushing against cold bark. Snowflakes loosened and drifted onto my sleeves, melting into tiny beads of water. I paused. The world paused with me. No steps, no rustling, only the thick weight of morning fog settling deeper into the hollow. I listened, holding my breath until my chest ached. Nothing. A small part of me relaxed, just enough to exhale, and that's when it moved again. A single step, right behind me, close enough that the frost around my feet trembled lightly. My stomach pulled tight. I didn't turn. I couldn't. I started to run. The cold air stung my face, sharp needles pricking my skin. Branches whipped lightly against my coat. Frost cracked under my boots in frantic bursts. And behind me, the footsteps followed, matching, perfect. Every hurried stride I took echoed by that same soft speed. Too soft, too controlled, too close. My breath came fast, forming thick clouds that blurred the trees ahead. Shadows flickered between them, bending strangely in the pale morning light. The trail curved, dipping into a shallow clearing. My feet slid on a patch of frozen mud, and I stumbled forward, catching myself on my hands. Cold shot my arms. My palms burned from frost. The footsteps halted, right at the edge of the clearing, not coming closer. I didn't look back. I pushed myself to my feet, legs shaking, breath fogging the air in uneven bursts. For a moment, the world felt suspended, a thin, trembling thread holding everything still. The frost settled again, quiet, delicate. Then a slow exhale drifted toward me through the trees. Not loud, not human, just a presence releasing breath into the morning. I stepped backward, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack the ice around me. Another footprint appeared in the frost, right in front of me, pressed down by nothing I could see. The ground beneath it seemed to sigh, the ice shifting slightly under invisible weight. I retreated, my boots crushing frozen leaves. My fingers tingled, numbness creeping up my wrists. My breath trembled, mist in the air like whispered smoke. The fog thickened, funneling to the trees in slow spirals. The clearing darkened even as the sun rose behind the hills. I turned and walked, not running this time, just moving with quiet, careful steps. The presence didn't follow. The matching footsteps didn't return. Only the frost crackled softly beneath me with each step. As I reached the main trail, the fog lifted a little, allowing pale light to settle across my path. The cold loosened its grip on my hands enough for me to breathe again. I didn't look behind me. I didn't need to. I could still feel the patience in the quiet. Something waiting. Something that had learned my pace and chosen to match it. The footprints remained in the clearing, frozen into the earth. Fresh, deep, facing the direction I had run. As though whatever made them was still standing there. Still listening. Still deciding when to follow again. Late afternoon light filtered weakly through the trees, fading into a gray that felt more like winter than fall. The fog had been thick all day, low to the ground, brushing my shins with a cold, steady touch. Each breath I took came out in a small, trembling cloud. The forest felt different now, quieter, like something had settled into the spaces between the trunks, waiting. I followed the narrow path, boots sinking into soft earth still damp from last night's frost. Branches above held no birds, no movement, only stillness stretched in over everything. I rubbed my hands together, trying to warm the stiffness in my fingers. My breath drifted up, pale and slow, dissolving into the fog. Then I saw it, a flicker, a shift in the corner of my eye, so quick it almost felt imagined, but the feeling it left behind was real. A ripple of static down my spine, a sudden sense that I wasn't walking alone anymore. I kept moving, telling myself it was nothing, a branch, a trick of light, the fog twisting, but the shape reappeared, dark, tall, just beyond the nearest line of trees. It didn't rush, didn't hide. It simply matched me. Every soft step I took, it seemed to glide along the other side of the trunk, as if pacing me through the woods. I slowed. The earth muffled my footsteps in damp, quiet strokes. The shadows slowed too. I felt a tightness settle into my chest. A quiet fear, small but sharp, threading through my breath. I tried to look directly at it, turning my head slowly. The fog swelled around the trees, blurring edges, swallowing outlines. The shadow melted into the gray, but not fully, not gone. A darker shape remained in the haze. Still, waiting. I called out, not loud, just enough to break the silence. My voice didn't carry. The fog held it, softening the sound until it felt like I hadn't spoken at all. I tried again, throat tighter this time. Only a faint breath escaped, lost before it reached the trees. The forest swallowed everything. I took a careful step backward. Leaves rustled under my heel, cold and brittle. The scent of wet bark filled the air. At the edge of my vision, movement. The shadow moved with me. It didn't lurch or rush. It simply shifted, matching my pace with unnatural calm, like a reflection in a warped mirror. I felt the hair on my arms rise. A cold tremble slipped down my back. The fog pressed closer, thick enough to almost feel against my skin. I stepped forward again. The figure answered, always in the corner of my sight, never fully seen. I wanted to shout, to ask what it wanted, to ask if it was following me or guiding me deeper. But each attempt dissolved into the same muffled nothing, like the forest had decided that my voice didn't belong here. A heaviness settled in the air, making every breath taste stale, like old leaves and cold stone. I felt smaller with each step, swallowed by the quiet, wrapped in fog until the world became narrow and strange. The trees closed in around the path, their shadows stretching across the ground in long, thin lines, lines that moved when I wasn't watching. I brushed past a low branch, its needles cold and wet against my cheek. The sharp scent of pine clung to my skin. Another flicker to my left. The shadow stepped closer, closer than before, close enough that I felt the static of its presence tickle the air around my arm. I turned sharply. Only fog, gray, heavy, silent, but I wasn't alone. Every sense I had told me something stood just beyond sight, studying me through the white haze. The trail sloped downward, leading into a darker part of the woods. Even the fog seemed afraid to gather there, leaving the ground bare, exposed. I hesitated at the top of the slope. The silence below felt wrong. Too deep, too empty. When I paused, the shadow paused. When I breathed out, slow and shaky, the fog shifted behind me, as if something large exhaled at the same time. The cold deepened along my spine. I whispered one more word, a soft, broken call into the gray. Nothing returned, not even an echo. The shadow waited. Still, patient, I stepped down the slope. The fog parted ahead of me, thin and trembling. The trees stretched tall and dark, their shapes bending in strange angles as the light faded. Somewhere behind the nearest trunk, I felt the shadow shift, not following, not chasing, just watching. Just matching my every step from a place I couldn't fully see. I walked deeper. The silence tightened. My breath softened. And though the shape never showed its face, never stepped into the open, I knew it stayed with me. A quiet companion in the fog. A reflection that didn't belong to me. A shadow waiting between the trees. For a moment I couldn't yet understand. Evening settled over the forest in a slow, fading hush. The last bit of daylight slipped behind the hills, and the fog rose to meet it, drifting through the trees like pale strands of silk. Cold brushed across my cheeks, soft and steady. I walked the narrow trail with careful steps. The ground felt damp under my boots, a thin layer of moisture clinging to the dirt. The air smelled of wet pine and something faintly sweet, like decaying leaves hidden under the frost. The silence pressed close, too close, as if the world held its breath around me. Mist curled around my legs, wrapping itself higher as I moved. Each step disappeared into gray before it touched the earth. I felt the fog cling to my coat, sinking into the fabric like cold fingertips. Then something shifted. My name drifted through the mist, soft, barely formed, as if someone tried to speak it without a mouth. I stopped. My breath tightened. The fog swirled gently around me, brushing my skin like a whisper I couldn't fully hear. I turned my head slowly. Nothing moved. No figure. No shape. Only mist, stretching out in all directions. I whispered my own name back, just to steady myself. It dissolved the moment it left my lips, swallowed whole by the air. The forest felt thicker now, the fog heavier. My heartbeat deepened, slow but uneasy, thudding against the cold inside my chest. I took another step. The mist shifted with me. Then the voice returned, closer this time, a breath of syllables sliding past my ear. My name, but stretched thin, barely human. I felt warmth against my neck, a breath that didn't belong to the cold air. My hands went numb for a moment. I turned quickly. expecting to catch a shape in the fog. A shadow, a figure, nothing. The mist drifted as if nothing had disturbed it. I stood still for a long moment, letting my breath settle, trying to listen without listening too hard. The silence felt too deep to push into. The fog wrapped tighter around my shoulders, almost like fabric tightening in a cold wind. I brushed a hand across it, and moisture clung to my fingers. Cold, heavy, strange. Another exhale, warm against the side of my throat. I flinched. My body reacted before my mind did, a small jerk that sent ripples through the fog. I spun around again, heart climbing higher in my chest. No one stood behind me. No one at all. But the mist looked different now. Thicker, darker in places where the light should have slipped through. I took a step back. The soft rustling of damp leaves brushed against my boots. A faint hum buzzed low in the air, too subtle to place, like static hiding inside the fog. My breath came faster. I tried to call out again, not my name, just a sound to break the stillness. It didn't carry. The fog caught it, pressed it down, swallowed it like the forest didn't want anything loud inside its walls. I wasn't sure if I was alone anymore. Shadows drifted between the trees, slow and quiet, their shapes impossible to understand. Not figures, not animals, just dark areas in a place that should have been evenly gray. They didn't move with the wind. They moved with intention. I backed away from the closest one, my boots sinking into soft mud. A thin chill crawled up my spine, each vertebra turning stiff under the cold. Another whisper cut through the air. My name again, but different now. Almost pleading, almost knowing. The fog brushed my face. Soft, cool, then suddenly warm, like someone's breath sighed against my cheek, slow and close enough to feel. My skin prickled. A sharp, electric shiver washed through me. I tried to speak, to tell it to stop, to ask what it wanted, but the words would not form. My throat tightened, voice trapped under the weight of the mist. The hum deepened, low and steady, blending with the faint rustling of leaves behind me. I couldn't tell what direction it came from. It felt like it was everywhere at once. I stepped forward. The fog parted, then closed and again, as if adjusting to each movement I made. A shape flickered at my right, gone before I could turn. Another to my left, then behind. They drifted like shadows without bodies, circling slowly, never touching, but always near enough to feel. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to keep the cold from sinking deeper. My breath shivered out of me, long and uneven. The forest held still. Then, one more exhale against the back of my neck. Warm, slow, almost gentle. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I didn't move at all. Didn't dare. When I opened them, the shadows had retreated. The fog eased its grip, softening around my body like loosening silk. The hum faded. The rustling quieted. The warmth vanished, replaced by the ordinary chill of evening. I stood alone on the trail, truly alone this time. The mist drifted forward, carrying nothing but pale light and silence. But as I walked on, still breathing slowly, still shaking slightly, I knew something the fog had learned my name and whispered it with purpose. Night settled deeper into the forest, pressing the last traces of daylight into thin lines between the branches. The air felt colder than before, sharper, as if the season itself had shifted in a single breath. Moist earth clung to the scent around me, thick and damp. I followed the trail slowly, watching the pale light of the moon blur against drifting fog. Each step left a soft imprint in the soil. Each breath felt too loud in the quiet. Ahead of me, the trees thinned into a small hollow, a dip in the ground covered with dry leaves and tangled roots. I'd passed it many times, but tonight the place felt different. The rustling began before I even reached the edge. Not the gentle kind. Not the kind that came from small animals or a shift in the wind. This was rough, frantic, as if the leaves were being pulled apart by invisible hands. I stopped. My skin tightened. The fog drifted over my shoes, moving slow and steady, while the hollow in front of me shook with quiet violence. No wind touched my face. No breeze brushed the trees. Still, the leaves scattered, flicking upward, sliding across the dirt. rolling over one another like something underneath was trying to crawl out. I felt a hum rise in the air, faint low, almost hidden under the rustling. It vibrated against my ribs, steady as a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I took a step closer. The hollow pulsed with movement. Dry leaves lifted in small waves. Shadows curled beneath them, shifting like dark water. My breath came out slow, clouding in front of me. The cold wrapped around my wrists, tightening as if the air was trying to pull me back. I couldn't look away. Another wave of rustling broke across the hollow. Leaves scattered upward and spun in a jagged arc before falling again. Some brushed against my boots, still cold, but too warm in the center, like something alive had touched them first. I whispered to myself that it was nothing, just a trick of the night, just nerves. But I didn't believe my own words. I felt it then. Eyes, not seen, not clear, but present, watching from inside the dark. The feeling settled between my shoulder blades, warm and heavy, as if someone stood close behind me. I didn't turn. I couldn't trust what turning would show me. The hollow darkened around the edges. The fog thickened at its center, rolling inward instead of outward, like breath pulling itself back into lungs I couldn't see. The rustling grew sharper, leaves scraping, leaves dragging, leaves twisting against roots that didn't move. I stepped back without meaning to. The soil crunched under my heel, damp and soft. A faint crackle of static brushed my ears, curling down the side of my neck like cold fingertips. The watching settled deeper. I could almost point to the place in the dark where it came from, between two thick branches. In the deepest part of the hollow, a patch of shadow too still to be natural. I stared at it. It stared back. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. But I felt the intent, a slow, patient awareness, studying the way I stood, the way I inhaled, the way fear gathered beneath my ribs. The rustling eased suddenly, not fading, stopping. All at once, the leaves dropped into stillness, falling flat across the ground. The hum in the air shivered once, then went silent. I waited. I don't know how long. Seconds felt like minutes. Minutes felt like the forest forgot time existed. The darkness in the hollow didn't shift, didn't retreat. It only watched. My legs trembled as I stepped back again. The fog rose with me, brushing against my knees, cool and steady. I felt the cold settle in my chest, making it hard to breathe evenly. The forest stayed quiet. I turned slowly, careful not to break the fragile stillness. My footsteps sank into dirt, each one soft, each one trembling. The air behind me felt heavy, as if something leaned close, waiting for me to look back. I didn't. I walked until the hollow faded out of sight, until the rustling memory thinned into silence, until the watching no longer pressed against my spine. Only then did I lift my eyes toward the trail ahead, fog drifting, moon pale, forest still. But even as I moved deeper into the night, I felt those unseen eyes linger in the hollow behind me, waiting in the dark with a patience older than the trees. Night held the forest in a cold, steady stillness. Late autumn clung to branches, making the bark feel damp under my fingertips. Fog drifted low across the roots, brushing my ankles like soft threads of frost. I moved slowly, letting my breath settle in the quiet. The trail ahead was faint, only a thin line between dark trunks. My footsteps felt too loud, even though the ground was gentle and wet. That was when I saw it, a pale glow, floating between the trees. Soft, round like a lantern without a hand to hold it. It didn't flicker. It didn't blink. It simply glowed, steady and white, warming nothing around it. My breath tightened in my chest. For a moment, I wondered if it was moonlight caught on mist. But the moon sat high and still, far behind me. The glow moved, slowly, almost lazily, sliding through the fog, like it had learned how to drift. Curiosity rose before fear did. A strange pull, quiet, calm, like the glow wanted me to follow. I stepped forward, and the damp leaves shifted under my boots. The glow eased away, keeping the same distance no matter how far I walked. Not fleeing, not approaching, just out of reach. The forest around it dimmed, shadows stretching long around the floating light. Fog swirled in slow circles, drawn to it as if breathing along with its motion. I whispered, unsure why. My voice felt swallowed again, fading into stillness. The glow did not react. Another step, another quiet crunch of wet leaves, and it drifted deeper into the trees. A mix of wonder and unease knotted inside me. A question I couldn't name. A fear I couldn't shake. The air smelled sharper the closer I got. Cold pine, damp soil, a faint metallic tang that settled on my tongue. The glow brightened for a moment, just enough to make the fog shimmer like thin silver threads. Then it dimmed again, shrinking to a softer pulse. Pulse, that was the word that came to mind. The glow didn't just shine, it breathed. Each time it swelled with light, a faint hum brushed the edges of the silence. A trembling in the air, so light I almost thought I imagined it. I reached out without thinking, my fingers barely brushing the colder air around it. But the glow slid back again, the same distance as before. Always the same distance. It felt intentional, like a game played slowly. Without rules I understood. Shadows hung thicker between the trees now. Branches curled overhead, closing the path behind me. Only that pale glow stayed clear, guiding me deeper into places the moonlight couldn't touch. I felt alone, but not empty alone. More like the forest held its breath around me, waiting. I stopped walking. The glow paused too, hovering in the same soft silence. Its edges blurred in the fog, stretching thin, then thick again, like the shape of it couldn't stay still, like it wasn't solid, but something pretending to be. My heart tapped against my ribs. Slow, uneven. I stepped back. Just once. The glow responded. It drifted forward, not fast, but purposeful, closing the space between us by the smallest amount. I felt the cold gather on my skin, a prickling along my arms, a warning that didn't come from sound or movement, just instinct. I swallowed, the air dry in my throat. The glow hovered closer, pulsing once more, brighter this time. White, then pale blue, then white again. The fog trembled around it. Leaves rustled against one another without wind. The hum deepened, brushing against the inside of my ears. Something in me wanted to turn and run, but another part stayed frozen, held by the strange beauty of the light. A light that felt alive, intentional, almost aware. Then, as if sensing the fear rising in my breath, the glow dimmed to a soft flicker. It drifted back, just a few inches, like it was giving me space. The forest eased with it. The fog loosened. The air warmed just enough to breathe again. I took a slow step away. The glow didn't follow this time. It hovered still, fading gently, its edges dissolving into the dark. The hum softened into nothing. The shadows eased. Then, with one last pulse, like a heartbeat letting go, the glow slipped behind a tree and vanished into quiet. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the silence settle again, feeling the cold drift back to normal. Wonder and unease curling together in my chest like twin threads of smoke. When I finally turned away, the trail felt unfamiliar, the fog thinner, the forest calmer. Yet somewhere behind me, in the places the pale light had touched, I felt the faintest shimmer of something watching. Not unkind, not cruel, just waiting. Night pressed deeper into the forest, thicker than before, heavier than the cold around my coat. Late autumn wrapped the air in frost. The ground felt stiff under my boots, each step leaving a pale print in the dirt. Fog clung low along the path, soft as breath, curling around my ankles like it wanted to follow me. Everything felt quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes the trees lean in listening. I pulled my arms tighter around myself and kept walking, trying to keep my breath steady in the cold. Then the howl rose, long, deep, a sound stretched thin across the night. It reached through the trees and into the ground beneath me, vibrating up through the frost and into my bones. I froze. It wasn't a wolf, not the sharp rise and fall I'd heard before. And it wasn't human, either. It sat in some strange middle place, too layered, too full, like more than one voice tangled into one cry. My breath slipped out in a shaky cloud. Another howl cut through the fog, lower this time, darker, echoing off the hollow spaces between the trees. It felt close and far at the same time. The hair on my arms rose beneath my sleeves. I tried to move, but my legs stayed still, as if the frost had climbed up and locked me in place. The howl drifted again, stretching longer now, almost a moan, almost a warning. The earth under me seemed to hum with it, a trembling that nudged at my heels and made the fog swirl in tight circles. I swallowed hard and forced one step forward. Then another. Each footfall felt too loud in the quiet, like I was walking across shattered glass. I kept my eyes on the trees, looking for any shape, any shadow that didn't belong. But the fog blurred everything, turning the world into pale streaks and dark smears. Then the howl came again. This time it broke in the middle, a sharp twist upward that scraped the inside of my ears and left my chest tight. I felt something shift behind me, a rustle through dead leaves. Soft, slow, like something dragging itself just enough to be heard. I didn't turn. Couldn't. The cold wrapped my throat, thick and tight, making my breath shallow. Another howl rolled through the forest. Shorter now, angrier, as if it had lost patience. The ground trembled again, small vibrations moving like tiny footsteps under the dirt. My heart thudded in uneven beats. I finally turned my head, just a little, just enough to see if anything stood behind me. Nothing. Only fog, stretching into more fog. But the feeling of being watched stayed sharp across my shoulders. I slowly backed away, my boots sinking into the soft frost. My breath made thin white ribbons in the air. The trees leaned inward, their branches curling like long fingers above me. Shadows pulled at their bases, thick and still. Then, from somewhere deep in the forest, the howl came again. This time it sounded like it rose from the ground itself, moving through roots and stone, shuddering up into the air around me. My knees weakened. The cold pressed tighter. The fog felt heavy, like it wanted to pull me down. I crouched slightly, not sure if I meant to hide or simply brace myself for something I couldn't name. The howl faded into a strange silence, a silence that wasn't empty, a silence that felt held. Waiting. The rustling behind me stopped. The ground stopped trembling. Only my breath moved, shallow and quiet. I stood still for a long moment, listening to the quiet settle like dust. Then, slowly, I straightened again. Nothing moved. Nothing called. The forest drifted back to its cold, steady stillness. I took one careful step. Then another. The fog parted just a little, letting a hint of pale moonlight slip through the trees. Somewhere far behind me, so faint it could have been memory, the howl rose once more, soft, low, almost tired. Then it faded into night, leaving the forest quiet and the air around me still. I walked on, feeling that strange tremble still lodged deep in my bones, as if the earth hadn't forgotten whatever made that cry. The rain had stopped some time before dawn, but the air still held the smell of wet earth and cold leaves. A thin blanket of fog drifted low across the ground, curling around my camp like pale smoke. I stepped out of the tent slowly, hugging my arms tight against the chill. The morning felt muted, quiet in a way that made the trees seem farther apart, and somehow closer at the same time. My boots sank into the mud with a soft pull. The ground was thick and dark, holding the memory of the night in its heavy weight. I glanced around, trying to shake off the strange feeling in my chest. A kind of tension, like something waiting just beyond the fog line. Then I saw them. Footprints. Large. Deep. Pressed into the mud. In a perfect line. I followed them with my eyes. One by one. My breath catching as I traced the direction they faced. All of them pointed toward my tent. Toward me. Toward where I had been sleeping just a few minutes ago. I felt the cold slide under my skin. The prints looked nothing like my boots. They were wider, longer, almost bare, but too smooth to be animal. My throat tightened. I crouched closer, my breath shaking slightly as it brushed across the chilled air. The mud around the prints was still wet, still shifting at the edges. Fresh, very fresh. I stood again, slowly, feeling the forest pressing around me. The fog thickened near the tree line, making everything beyond a few feet blur into pale shapes. I kept staring into that fog, waiting for something to move, something to step forward, something to claim those footprints. Nothing did, but the silence grew heavier. I took a careful step back, my boot sinking beside one of the prints. The size difference made my stomach twist. Whatever left them was much larger than me. A soft, rustling drifted through the trees, leaves sliding against one another, gentle and slow, but without any wind to push them. I turned my head toward the sound, heart tapping unevenly. The fog shifted again, as if something had passed through it, just out of sight. I swallowed hard. My breath felt too loud, too warm against the cold air. The footprints formed a perfect path, as if somebody had walked right up to where I slept and stopped. Stood there, watched. The thought made the back of my neck prickle, a soft static that crawled beneath my skin. I stepped away from the tent, trying to put distance between myself and those silent impressions in the mud. But then I noticed something else. A second line of prints, just a few feet to the right. Fainter, but still pointing toward the same place. Two paths, both ending at me. I felt a pulse of panic rise in my chest, quick and sharp. I turned in a slow circle, eyes scanning the trees, the fog, the ground. Nothing shifted, nothing breathed, but the sense of being watched grew heavier, as if the forest itself leaned closer. I whispered a quiet question, barely a breath of sound, hoping the stillness wouldn't swallow it. No answer came. The rustling returned, this time behind me. I spun too quickly, my foot sliding in the mud. I steadied myself, heart pounding in my ears. The fog there looked darker, layered, as if something stood inside it, hidden just enough to stay unseen. I took a step back, then another, feeling my pulse hammer tight beneath my ribs. A chill brushed across my shoulders, light as fingers made of cold air. I didn't turn to look. I couldn't. Instead, I focused on my breathing, slow, shallow, trying not to shake. The forest stayed quiet. The prints stayed still. But the feeling of being hunted settled deep into my bones. I forced myself to move, just a few steps toward the trail, boots sinking into the mud again. The fog closed behind me, soft and thick. Somewhere far off, leaves rustled as if something shifted its weight, as if something realized I was leaving. I didn't look back, not even once. But as I stepped farther from the camp, I felt it, a strange, heavy awareness trailing just behind my breath, like those prints weren't finished forming yet, like they were only waiting for my next step to follow. The forest felt different that night. Late autumn, cold air pressing low across the ground. I sat near the edge of my small camp, watching the pale light of the moon spill through the thin branches. Everything was still, too still. My breath rose in soft curls. My fingers were numb from the wind, but I kept them close to the fire. I tried to listen to the quiet, tried to feel normal for a moment, but the trees felt hollow around me, like they were waiting, leaning in, holding their breath with mine. Then it started. A low hum pushed through the silence. Then at first, like something far away, pressing up through layers of fog and dirt. I lifted my head. My ears felt warm, almost buzzing. The air trembled against my cheek. The hum grew heavier. Not loud, just close. Too close. It wrapped around me, soft and slow, like static crawling under my skin. The kind you feel before you hear it. A vibration in the bones before the air catches up. My heartbeat tried to rise, but the hum pressed on it, flattening it, drowning it. I couldn't tell if I was breathing too fast or not at all. I stood, one shaky step into the pale grass. The trees swayed without wind. Their branches clicked together like teeth. I whispered into the dark, "Is someone there?" But even my own voice felt swallowed. Thin, unwelcome. The hum thickened, like something was moving between the trunks. Something large, slow. Each breath tasted strange, like metal and cold smoke. My hands trembled in the open air as I tried to follow the vibration. It wasn't coming from one direction. It was everywhere, above me, under me, inside the space between each heartbeat. I took another step. The ground felt soft, too soft, like the dirt was rising to meet my boots. The static crawled up my legs, brushing past my knees, humming against my ribs. I could feel it gathering, pulling itself into a shape I couldn't see. A shape I didn't want to see. The fire behind me flickered once, then dimmed, like something had passed in front of it. I turned slowly. Shadows stretched long across the ground, but nothing moved. My breath hitched in my throat. The hum shifted. dropping lower. A deep, steady vibration that pressed into my eardrums until my eyes watered. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. It kept going from the inside. My knees felt weak. My teeth buzzed. The trees leaned closer, their bark trembling. For a moment I thought the whole forest would tear open. Then silence, a sudden, sharp stillness, like someone had snuffed out the world. I stumbled forward. The air felt too thin, empty after being so full. My ears rang in the leftover quiet. I waited for the hum to return, for anything to move, but the silence held me in place, cold and heavy. I wiped my face with shaky hand. The fire crackled weakly behind me, trying to come back to life. Its warmth reached only a few inches, falling short of my skin. Something rustled to my left. Soft, slow. I froze. The trees that were darker, swallowed by shadow. I stared at the space between them, waiting for the humming to rise again, waiting to see what had slipped away when the silence fell. But nothing stepped out. Nothing breathed. The rustling faded, and the forest returned to its hollow stillness. A waiting kind of quiet, a quiet that felt too aware of me. I backed toward the fire, each step heavy. My boots pressed into the dirt like the ground didn't want to let go. I sat down again, pulling my coat tighter against my body. For a long time I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't blink. I kept watching the trees. Their thin branches curled and twisted in the dark, almost reaching for each other, almost reaching for me. The hum didn't return, but the memory of it stayed lodged behind my ribs, vibrating faintly, like a warning I couldn't shake. The silence around me grew deeper, colder, heavier, and even though nothing touched me, nothing breathed near me, nothing stepped into the light. I felt watched, more than watched, listened to, as if the stillness had ears, as if something in the dark was waiting for the right moment to hum again. I didn't sleep, not even when the fire burned low and the night pressed itself tight around the camp. I just sat there alone in the pale glow, listening to the silence and feeling it breathe right beside me. The night felt heavier than usual. Autumn had pressed itself into the ground, leaving frost on the roots and a chill in the air that seeped through my coat. The fog curled low around the edges of the camp, soft and still, hiding everything beyond the ring of my fire. I woke to quiet, not the quiet I had slept in. Something was missing. The fire. I blinked. Ash sat cold and gray. Smoke had vanished. The warmth I had relied on was gone. I was certain I had stoked it before sleep, certain I had left the flames alive. But now, nothing remained. A shadow moved across the empty circle where the fire should have been, not the dancing shadow of flames, but a thick, hovering darkness that seemed to float above the ground. My hands felt cold. The frost had crept over my fingertips while I slept. I rubbed them together, trying to bring warmth back, but the shadows seemed to draw it away again. The trees loomed around me, fog curling between their trunks. The air smelled damp and faintly of smoke, though none remained. The silence pressed in. I thought I heard something shift, a soft footstep, or a movement in the fog. It was impossible to tell. I leaned closer to the cold ash, trying to convince myself that my memory had failed, that I had dreamed the fire alive. But the shadows hovered just above the circle, waiting. I could feel them, a presence, patient and quiet, watching me measure the cold earth with my hands. The fog swirled low around my boots. It carried the scent of wet leaves and soil, but under it lingered something metallic, sharp, faint. It made my stomach twist. I stepped back slowly. The shadows didn't move away. They didn't retreat. They lingered, pale shapes in the place where warmth had been. I tried to whisper a question into the dark, but my voice was swallowed instantly. Even the sound of my breath felt heavy and dense. A rustling rose from the edge of the camp. Leaves scraped against one another, but there was no wind, only the shadows, hovering where firelight had once danced. I reached toward the cold ash with one hand. It felt like touching nothing, like a memory of heat, soft and fleeting, that vanished before I could hold it. The fog shifted. A faint hum touched my ears, low and vibrating, just at the edge of perception. It made the silence deeper, pressing against my chest. I shivered. The air felt thick, heavy, almost alive. The shadows moved then, not quickly, Not aggressively. They drifted upward slightly, curving like smoke that had forgotten its fire. I stepped back again, my boots pressing into damp leaves. Each movement felt amplified in the stillness. Every breath I took was visible in pale clouds, yet the shadows ignored it all. I wanted to run. I wanted to wake from the dream this night had become. But something rooted me to the spot, a quiet curiosity, a quiet fear. I crouched near the edge of the cold circle. The fog seemed thinner here, yet the shadows thickened in response, leaning closer to me than any tree or branch could. The silence stretched, long patient. It did not judge, it simply watched. I rubbed my arms, shivering, fingers brushing wet leaves and cold soil. The fog smelled earthy and faintly sweet, but behind that lingered something stale, like the air itself had been trapped for years. I realized I couldn't even remember hearing the fire die. No crackle, no snap, just absence. The shadows hovered for a long moment. Then, slowly, they drifted just beyond the circle, leaning into fog as if dissolving into it. The air eased slightly. The chill stayed, but the pressure lifted. The fog rolled softly around my legs, and the forest seemed to breathe again. I stayed crouched, waiting, listening to the silence, to the faint hum of leaves and distant trees, to the memory of heat that had vanished into nothing. And as the fog curled around the empty fire circle, I realized the cold wasn't just outside. It had settled deep inside me, left behind by the shadows that had waited while the fire disappeared. The night felt thick, heavy with cold. Late autumn had left frost on every branch, and the fog curled low, crawling along the ground like smoke. I stepped carefully through the leaves, soft crunches beneath my boots. Each breath rose in pale clouds, but the air felt heavier than usual, like it pressed against my chest. I sensed it first before I saw it, the weight of being watched, not from the ground, from above. I lifted my eyes slowly. The branches swayed, though there was no wind, and in their darkness, two glints caught the pale moonlight, eyes, dark, unblinking orbs, reflecting a faint, cold light. They moved with me, tracking each step as though the trees themselves had learned to watch. A shiver ran down my spine. I felt my hair rise, skin prickling beneath my coat. The forest seemed to contract around me, leaning in closer with every rustle of fog-heavy leaves. I blinked. The eyes didn't disappear. They multiplied. More orbs appeared, faint glimmers among branches higher and higher. I tried to steady my breathing. Slow in, slow out. The mist made everything seem softer, but the weight of those eyes pressed through, cold and deliberate. Each step I took shifted the shadows beneath me. Branches creaked lightly, but the rustling came from above, from where the eyes waited. A dry, earthy scent drifted to my nose. Fallen leaves, damp soil, and something metallic faint. It made my stomach tighten. I stopped moving. The eyes stopped, too, for a heartbeat. The forest held its breath. Then a soft snap from a branch. Or maybe it was a footstep. It didn't matter. The gaze never wavered, never blinked, like the air itself had grown intent. I shifted, trying not to stumble. The frost under my boots crunched quietly, yet the eyes above didn't flinch. Each glint seemed to follow the shape of my head, the tilt of my shoulders, the pulse of my fear. I whispered my own name, barely audible. It didn't echo. It didn't answer. Only the forest, alive with stillness, listened. The mist thickened. It clung to my legs, rising slowly like a tide. I could feel it brushing my skin, and the eyes leaned closer to my imagination, though they remained still in the branches. I tried to move again, step by careful step. The branches above seemed to shift just enough to keep the glints aligned with me. Intentional, patient. A faint hum drifted through the fog, low, static, vibrating against the frost. I shivered again. The sound did not belong to anything I could see, yet it carried the same awareness as the eyes above. I glanced down at the ground. Shadows pooled between roots and stones. The fog blurred them, but it felt as if they, too, watched. I stopped once more, crouching slightly. The air was cold against my cheeks, my breath uneven and shallow. All around, the forest was silent, except for the low hum and the soft sighing of fog through the trees. Above me, the eyes remained, patient, unblinking, curious, almost, but heavy with something I couldn't name. I realized I didn't know how long I had been standing there. Minutes? Hours? The world had shrunk to the space between my feet and the branches above. Slowly, I backed toward the faint trail I had followed. The frost pressed under my boots, hard and brittle, but the eyes moved with me. Every step I took was mirrored in their gaze. The forest shifted slightly. A branch twitched, a faint rustle above. Yet nothing revealed itself. The eyes stayed dark and glinting, as if I had become part of their stillness. I exhaled. The fog curled closer around me. The low hum softened. The shadows beneath me deepened. I kept walking careful, deliberate, step by step, each movement measured against the weight of being watched. And though the fog swirled, though the forest breathed around me, and though my own pulse thrummed in my ears, I never lost a sense of eyes above, glinting, patient, waiting. The fog lay thick over the forest floor. Twilight had fallen, though the pale light still lingered between the trees. Every step I took pressed softly into damp leaves, the smell of wet earth curling around my nose. I had been walking for some time. Alone, the forest felt empty yet aware. Then I heard it, my voice, or almost my voice. A hollow echo, drifting from a small hollow just beyond a cluster of birch. It said my name, or something that sounded like it. I stopped. The air felt suddenly colder, heavier, pressing down on my shoulders. The rustling of leaves around me slowed, as if the forest had paused to listen. "Hello," I whispered, cautious. "Hello." The hollow repeated, a fraction behind, stretched thin, hollowed out. My own words returned to me, but not quite right. A twist in the tone, like a shadow of sound. I swallowed. The mist swirled around my boots, curling and soft. It carried the faint smell of smoke, or maybe something metallic. I couldn't tell. I tried again. "Is someone there? Is someone there?" The pause stretched, longer than natural. The words seemed to drip back toward me from a hollow. Slow, deliberate. I took a careful step forward. The ground was soft beneath my feet, wet leaves pressing into my boots. The fog shifted with me, brushing against my legs, curling higher toward my knees. The voice spoke again, repeating my words, but slower this time, distorted, like it was learning the shape of my mouth. I realized that I wasn't just hearing an echo. I was being mirrored, measured, waited on. A low hum rose from the trees, a vibration to the fog, and under the frost, pressing into my ribs. I shivered. The voice didn't answer this hum. It waited, patient. I tried to move closer to the hollow. Branches scraped lightly against each other, but the forest held its breath around me. Every step made the echo sharper, the hollow deeper, the delay longer. "Who are you?" I whispered carefully. "Who are you?" The words returned, slow and wet with shadow. I stopped moving. My chest tightened. The fog rose higher, curling around my thighs. I could feel it brushing against my skin, cold and damp. A faint rustle from the hollow. Or maybe the hollow itself shifted. I couldn't tell where the sound ended and the echo began. The voice repeated something I hadn't said this time. A single syllable, almost a breath. My throat went dry. The fog pressed closer, denser now, and the forest felt alive with awareness. Waiting, watching. I whispered a name that wasn't mine. The hollow echoed it perfectly, stretching the vowels, twisting the sound into something softer, more alien. I stepped back slowly. The ground was slick beneath the frost, but I didn't slip. The voice followed, soft, patient, mimicking always a fraction behind me. I could feel the trees leaning closer, branches brushing against each other like fingers. The air smelled damp, earthy, but beneath it lingered a faint tang like cold metal or old smoke. I turned my head, scanning the shadows. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, yet the echo clung to the fog, following me through every soft footstep. I realized I didn't know if I was walking toward the hollow or away from it. The voice followed regardless, a slow, patient shadow of myself trailing in sound. I crouched slightly, hands pressed to my knees, breath rising in small clouds. The echo lingered above my words, hovering in the mist. And though I could not see it, I felt it, a presence folded into the hollow, patient, waiting, mimicking every motion, every hesitation. The fog drifted higher, soft and thick, curling around the hollow's mouth. The echo faded slowly as I moved away, but the memory of it stayed lodged behind my ribs. I kept my steps slow, measured, aware that the hollow could hear me, could repeat me, even when I dared not speak. The forest held its breath with me. The voice faded to silence, but the hollow remained, watching, waiting. Even as the fog swallowed it from view, the forest had grown quiet, except for the soft crunch of leaves beneath my boots. Late autumn fog wrapped the trees in pale gray, curling around every branch, every root. The air clung to my skin, damp and cold, pressing softly against my face and neck. It carried whispers I couldn't place. Not words, not quite, more like the sighing of leaves, stretched thin and hovering. I paused, breath rising in pale clouds. The fog thickened around my ankles, then my knees. It moved with me, soft and slow, coiling as if alive. Shapes flickered in the mist. I thought I saw someone or something just at the edge of vision, a shadow bending between trunks, then dissolving as I blinked. I stepped forward. The dampness seeped into my coat. A faint rustle brushed against my ear. Nothing, just fog and whispers. The forest felt patient, watching, waiting. I reached out with one hand. The fog pressed against my fingers, soft, damp, as if it could wrap around me, pull me closer. I blinked again, a movement in the corner of my eye, a pale shape drifting between the trees. I turned, and it was gone. The mist held only itself. A low hum seemed to vibrate through the air, not loud, just beneath the edge of hearing. It brushed my ribs with a strange pressure, making the silence around me feel heavier. I breathed slowly, trying to feel the ground beneath my boots, to remind myself I was alone. But the whispers followed, curling the fog, moving where I moved. I saw it again, a vague figure, pale, hovering where the fog was thickest. It vanished when I shifted my gaze. I crouched slightly, fingers brushing cold leaves. The fog wrapped tighter, soft against my face, its damp scent heavy with soil and wet bark and something faintly metallic. Each step stirred the mist. It swirled and shifted with me, curling around my ankles, climbing my calves, coiling higher like the forest itself was breathing. The whispers rose in tone, soft, stretching, like the fog had learned my rhythm. A syllable echoed where I had stepped. Or maybe it wasn't sound at all, just the air folding into itself. I straightened, heart quiet but racing beneath the pressure of it all. Branches leaned in closer. Shadows thickened at their base. The fog filled the spaces between, dense and pale, hiding whatever had been waiting. That I moved again, slow, deliberate. The mist followed, curling around my legs, tangling with roots and fallen leaves. Every step left a trace, but it vanished almost immediately. Swallowed by the fog, the shape rose again. Tall, pale, barely defined. It drifted near, but never close enough to touch. Every time I blinked, it disappeared. Every time I turned, nothing remained. I tried to call out, but the words were caught in the damp air, pulled back into the fog like smoke. Silence swallowed them. The whispers softened more like sighs and sound. They curled around me, pressing gently, like the forest was breathing alongside me. I crouched again, hands pressed to the cold earth. The fog swirled at my wrists, soft, damp, moving with intention I could not name. Shapes appeared and vanished in the mist, always just beyond the edge of knowing. I realized I was holding my breath. Every step I had taken had been measured, every movement mirrored by the fog itself. The forest seemed to stretch, expanding beyond the light, beyond my reach. The whispers drifted, soft, patient. The fog clung, cold against my skin, and the shapes moved with me, always just out of reach, watching, waiting, fading. I rose slowly. Each step forward pressed into the soft leaves, each breath misting in front of me. The forest held me in its hush, and the fog trailed behind, a gentle, living presence that would not release me. The whispers softened to a sigh. The shapes vanished. The mist clung a moment longer, then drifted slightly apart, Folding into the forest around me, I walked onward. The fog followed, always following, always waiting. The forest was quiet, heavy with the scent of damp leaves and frost. Night pressed in, soft and still, but the mist clung close, brushing my skin, curling around my boots and wrists. I thought I heard a rustle, soft, low, almost swallowed by the fog. I stopped, breath rising in pale clouds. The silence stretched, thick and patient. Something moved, not in front of me, not behind, at the corner of my eye. A low shape, skimming the ground, slithering between roots and stones that I blinked. It was gone, but the space it had occupied seemed darker, denser. The cold pressed harder against my chest. A hum rose faintly in the fog, vibrating through the air, through the frost-crusted earth beneath my boots. I stepped forward slowly. The mist swirled at my ankles, curling upward, soft, damp, alive, and there was again, just a movement in the corner of my vision that I dared not turn fully. It was patient, measuring me, sliding low across the ground like a shadow that had learned to breathe. The smell of wet soil rose to my nose, metallic, faint, mixed with the damp tang of leaves and decay. I shivered. The shape mirrored. Nothing I knew that I froze. The fog thickened, brushing my cheeks, wrapping around my neck like silk. Every heartbeat sounded loud in my ears, yet the shape remained silent that I tried to focus. The mist teased my sight, shapes appearing then dissolving into the gray. I could feel the ground beneath me, roots pressing through frost and mud, but the shape glided between them, silent, deliberate. I whispered my own name, barely audible. No answer, only the low vibration of the air, and the movement, always at the edge, never fully revealed. I shifted my weight. The shape moved with me. Every step I took was mirrored in the corner of my vision, intentional, patient, waiting, a dry snap from a branch. Or was it a footstep? I couldn't tell. The shadow stayed low, sliding across the earth like liquid darkness. I crouched slightly, hands brushing frost-covered leaves. The fog clung closer, curling up my sleeves and around my boots, soft against my skin. The shape moved again, just a flicker, sliding between roots, stretching into a shadow long and unnatural. It followed, but never close enough to touch. I tried to breathe slowly, to steady the rising panic. The mist pressed in, and the low hum rose in my chest, a vibration that made every nerve sing. I could feel it more than see it now. Patient, watching, low to the ground. Every step I took, it shifted with me. I wasn't walking alone. It mirrored my pace, yet never approached fully. A creature of shadow, slithering between reality and mist. I stopped completely. The fog curled around my legs, stilling, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. The shape froze at the edge of sight, just a suggestion of movement, just a dark presence among frost and leaves. I exhaled slowly. The mist drifted with my breath. The shadow did not vanish. It lingered at the corner of my vision, patient, quiet, and aware. I started forward again, careful, measured. Each footstep pressed softly into wet leaves, yet I felt the shape slip alongside, a silent echo of intent, always just out of reach. The forest hummed faintly. The fog clung tight. The shape moved low, silent, patient. As I continued on, uncertain if I let it, or if it had been waiting for every step I would take. The fog lay heavy over the forest floor. Branches glistened with frost, and the chill pressed against my skin. Each step sank softly into damp leaves. The air was thick, still, except for a low rustle far ahead. Then it hit me, a smell, sharp, musky, unnatural. It curled in my nose and throat, prickling the back of my mouth. I gagged lightly, but couldn't look away. The mist swirled around my ankles, clinging to my boots. I could see pale light spilling through the trees, but it barely pierced the gray haze. Shadows shifted in the corner of my eye, sliding between trunks, then gone when I turned. I took a careful step forward. The scent grew stronger, richer, tinged with something metallic, like rust or old blood. I wanted to flee, but my body refused. I was drawn toward it. Leaves rustled under my fingers as I brushed them aside, trying to find the source. Nothing visible moved, yet the smell pressed closer, wrapping around my chest, my neck, curling into the hollow behind my ears. A low hum vibrated through the forest, not loud, but enough to make the air thrum against my ribs. I swallowed against a tang of fear and decay. I crouched slightly, hands brushing the frost-soaked leaves. The fog clung higher, soft and damp against my face, and the scent drifted closer. It wasn't like anything I had known. Animal? Rot? Smoke? All and none at once. I caught a glimpse of something low, slithering or creeping along the underbrush. My eyes darted, but the fog swallowed it immediately. It moved with purpose, patient, yet always just beyond sight. The metallic tang sharpened my awareness. Every breath tasted the forest differently, bitter and heavy, folded with something older, unfamiliar. The mist shifted around me, pressing like it knew I had noticed. A faint rustle behind me. I turned. Nothing, but the smell lingered, thick, close enough to burn my lungs. It was patient, waiting for me to move. I tried to step backward. The leaves stuck under my boots, moist and cold. The scent followed, curling around my legs, climbing my calves. I gagged again, but the compulsion to see, to move closer, was stronger than my fear. A shadow flickered in the fog, low, pale, slipping between roots. I blinked. It vanished, yet the smell persisted, slithering in the damp air, curling around my wrists, my face, a presence I could not define. The hum in the trees rose slightly, shivering through the air, through the frost, pressing softly into my chest. I crouched, pressing my hands to the wet earth, trying to ground myself in something solid. The fog shifted, and the smell pressed closer still, sharp and unnatural. I moved forward again, slow, careful, deliberate. The forest seemed aware of me, every breath, every shuffled leaves. The scent clung, wrapping around my chest, pulling me toward the underbrush, toward shadows I could not name. That I glanced down. Something slinked along the edge of my vision, not quite solid, not quite light. It moved slowly, patiently, like the forest itself had taken shape, just to watch me. That I exhaled slowly. The fog and scent swirled together, pressing against my skin and lungs. The shadow lingered, the smell clung, but I could not see more. It waited, patient and unseen. That I stepped back again, feet sinking slightly into soft leaves. The musky, metallic tang hovered, curling around me like silk, never leaving. The forest exhaled softly around me, and I moved slowly, carefully, with the creeping shape of the scent slithering always behind, waiting, watching, patient. The night pressed close. Fog clung to the trees, heavy and damp. Frost covered the leaves, crunching softly beneath my boots. Shadows flickered across the underbrush, unnatural, broken, like the frames of film skipping. Each pause revealing something new, something impossible. The figure rose, pale and thin, then vanished before I could focus. Another flicker, different shape, elongated, hunched, watching. That I held my breath. The air smelled of wet earth and frost, but beneath it, something faintly acrid, curling in the back of my throat. That I stepped forward, careful. The mist pressed against my sleeves, soft, damp, alive. The flickering figures followed, never still long enough to see clearly. A low hum vibrated through the trees, not loud, but enough to press against my chest, to make my skin tingle. Another flicker. This one small, crouched, then stretched tall and thin. Each shape seemed aware, mirroring my movements, just beyond recognition. That I crouched, pressing hands to wet leaves. The fog curled around my wrists, and my breath misted before me. The shadows shifted. A hand-like shape reached briefly, then dissolved into the gray. The forest seemed patient, waiting, watching. The flickers continued, soft and irregular, pulling at my awareness, curling around my mind. I tried to focus on the earth beneath my boots. Cold, solid, damp. But the shapes flickered again, elongated figures bending between the mist, then folding away, leaving only the sense of presence, heavy and quiet. A twig snapped nearby. I froze. Nothing moved, at least visibly. The mist wrapped closer, and the shadows flickered again. A crouched shape, then stretched, then gone. The smell of wet earth was thick, and beneath it, faint hints of something metallic, or perhaps ancient, hidden in the soil. I gagged lightly, but my eyes were drawn to the flickering shapes. I took a slow step forward. The fog moved with me, soft and damp against my skin. Another flicker, this one smaller, hovering near the edge of my vision. I blinked. It vanished. The air was quiet now, except for the soft hum of frost settling, the subtle sigh of the forest breathing. The flickers continued, always at the corner of perception, always just out of reach. I crouched again, hands pressing cold leaves to the forest floor. The figures shifted in a regular rhythm, a pale dance between mist and shadow. I exhaled slowly. Each breath rose in clouds. The forest seemed to fold around me, fog and shadow and silence intertwined. The flickers lingered at the edges, shapes that were not shapes, movements that were not mine. I rose, careful, deliberate. The mist brushed my face, soft and damp. The shadows flickered once more, then began to fade, folding back into fog. I walked onward. The pale, irregular flickers hovered in memory, a quiet unease lingering in the mist. The forest held its hush, and I moved forward alone, through fog, through shadow, through the soft, whisper heartbeat of the night. The fog pressed close, curling around my ankles, soaking my boots. The forest was still, except for the faint rustle of frost-laden leaves. My breath came out in shallow clouds, mingling with the damp air. Then I saw it, a tree, gnarled and massive, rising from the earth like a sentinel, its branches twisted in impossible angles. Shapes, faces, pale, hollow, judging. I stopped moving. The air smelled of wet bark and decay, sharp in my nose. The mist seemed to cling tighter around me. Every branch felt alive, shifting subtly as I blinked. I stepped closer, careful, trying to convince myself it was just knots and wood. But the shadows between the branches, they seemed deliberate, observing. A hollow for an eye, a curl of bark like a twisted mouth. The forest was silent. Even the hum of wind had paused. I could feel my heartbeat thudding in my chest. Yet the tree remained still, patient, aware. A shiver ran down my spine. The fog curled against my face, damp and cold. Every step I took, the tree seemed to lean slightly, as if following, tracking, silently judging. I pressed my hands against the rough bark. It was cold, solid, yet I could swear it exhaled, a faint sigh that carried the scent of wet leaves and something older, hidden. I moved around it slowly. The twisted faces shifted just enough to catch the edge of my vision. I blinked. They remained, unblinking, staring. A pale light broke through the mist, glinting on the rough surfaces. The shadows deepened in response. The tree's presence was suffocating, as though the forest itself had gathered into this single, living gaze. I took a cautious step back. The fog wrapped around my calves. Damp and clingy, the bark beneath my fingertips felt warm, almost pulsing. My stomach churned, and a quiet dread settled into my bones. I tried to speak, call it out. My voice dissolved into the fog. The tree didn't move, but I felt its awareness, weighty and patient, folding the silence around me. I breathed slowly, trying to ground myself. The mist softened my edges, the earthy scent thick in the damp air. Yet the faces lingered, twisted and watching. Even as my eyes moved away, even as I stepped back, the shadows and the branches stretched. A low rustle of leaves, though no wind stirred. The tree exhaled slowly, and I realized the forest was holding its breath with me. I pressed my palms to my thighs, cold and wet from fog. The gnarled shapes remained, faces twisted in stillness and silence. I could not shake the feeling that it had followed me, and would continue to watch long after I left the clearing. I turned slowly, stepping away. The mist swallowed my outline, but the sense of its gaze lingered, a heavy, patient weight on my shoulders. I walked on alone, through fog, through shadow, through the forest that felt alive, and watched. The fog lay heavy on the forest floor, curling around my boots. The damp earth smelled of moss and decay, sharp in the chill. Breath came shallow, misting before me. Then I noticed them. Footsteps, circling, silent, not a crunch, not a brush, just presence in the earth. I stopped. They stopped. A pause, stretched in. Then I moved. They followed, matching each careful step. I pressed my hands to my thighs, feeling the cold moisture seep through. The mist clung to my hair, my neck, as if the forest itself had grown tight. Shapes shifted in the fog, pale outlines of trees bending into impossible angles. The silence weighed heavy. Even the faint hum of distant wildlife had vanished. The footsteps moved with me, patient, aware, circling wide then closing in. I could feel them in my chest, in the air around me, though nothing appeared before my eyes. I froze again, a soft exhale, my own breath shaking, and the footsteps mirrored my pause. I swallowed. The air tasted damp, metallic. Something unseen pressed against the edges of my senses. I took a cautious step to the side. The footsteps followed. A branch shivered nearby. No wind, no creature, just a rhythm of unseen presence. The fog pressed closer, wrapping around my calves and hands. A twig snapped beneath my own foot. The footsteps slowed, then resumed in time with mine. I could almost feel them behind me, breathing in the spaces between heartbeats. I wanted to call out, to break the pattern, but my voice was swallowed by fog. The forest leaned in, patient, silent. The footsteps never faltered. I crouched low, pressing palms to the frozen earth. The soil smelled faintly of moss and rot. The mist curled tighter around my face. The footsteps paused. A soft, impossible stillness. Then, a single step behind me. I turned slowly. Nothing. Only fog, shadows, the cold pressing against my skin. I tried to walk, slow and careful. The footsteps matched. Around me, the forest seemed to bend, the fog shifting in rhythm with something unseen. The air was thick with fear, heavy, wet, almost alive. I halted once more. A breath. The footsteps stopped. A silence deeper than any night I had known. I could hear the faint drip of water from leaves, the settling of frost in the mist, and nothing else. I took a single, measured step forward. They followed. I exhaled slow, steady, and the fog whispered against my skin. The forest was patient. Unseen eyes, unseen feet, circling still. I kept moving, careful, slow, feeling each soft step on the wet, frozen earth. The footsteps mirrored me, patient, unwavering. Always behind, always close, yet never visible. The mist softened around me, the pale outlines of trees bending gently in the hush. I could not see the source, but the rhythm remained, a presence in every breath, every heartbeat, a quiet, creeping dread that pressed against the bones. I exhaled into the cold night, listening to the silence, to the faint echo of steps that were not my own. The forest held me in its mist, and I walked onward alone with the soft, patient footsteps circling, always there, always near in the silence. The forest floor was damp, leaves pressed with frost. Mist hung low, curling around the base of trees. Each breath tasted cold, metallic, and wet. Then the leaves shifted, slowly. Beneath my feet, a subtle movement, as though something heavy pressed from below. No wind stirred them. No creature emerged. I crouched, listening. The forest seemed to lean in, holding its breath. A soft rustle. Beneath the thick carpet of decay, a presence unseen, moving just out of sight. I reached out, fingertips brushing damp moss. The cold clung to my skin. The rustling paused and I blinked, resumed when I moved, a pattern deliberate, patient. The fog pressed closer, curling against my jacket and hair. Shadows bent around the trees, pale in the dim moonlight. Something stirred, brushing leaves aside, leaving no trace. I felt eyes, or something like them, following each motion. I stepped forward cautiously. Leaves shifted again. The movement slow, deliberate. The forest itself felt aware, alive, silent judgment pressing against my shoulders. I crouched low to the earth, listening. The scent of wet soil and decaying would fill my nose. A hum of anticipation, vibrating through the air. The rustling never stopped, always just beyond my reach, like the forest was breathing beneath me. I exhaled. The fog seemed to thicken, clinging to my skin, to my hair, to the space between heartbeats. A shadow flickered along a tree trunk. I turned, but nothing stood there. The movement persisted. Leaves shivered under weight that had no shape, no discernible source. A soft pressure in the soles of my boots. The The forest whispered in the language of rustling and damp air. I tried to stay still, listening. The unseen presence moved carefully beneath the leaves, its patience stretching into the silence. Every shift sent a shiver along my spine. I breathed slowly, cautiously, feeling the mist curl around my neck and shoulders. The forest was patient. It waited, always just out of reach, always beneath, watching through the rustle. A leaf fell, landing softly on my hand. I froze. The rustling stilled. A heartbeat, then resumed, faint, deliberate, beneath the weight of something unseen. I rose slowly, each movement careful. The fog wrapped tighter. The forest hummed quietly around me, wet earth and fallen leaves pressing faintly against my senses. The presence remained beneath, silent yet palpable, a hidden life moving in the shadows of decay. I took a single step forward. Leaves shivered. The rustle beneath whispered in rhythm with my own heartbeat. I kept walking, slowly, deliberately. The forest watched, always beneath, always unseen, always waiting. The forest was silent, heavy with fog. Branches dripped with moisture, brushing my face as I stepped carefully. The earth smelled damp, rich, and hollow beneath my boots. I caught movement between the trunks, a pale shape, still, too rigid, too perfect to be human. The fog curled around it, softening edges, making it shimmer like smoke. It did not blink, did not breathe, did not move in any way I could recognize. I froze. The air felt thicker. My breath steamed in the cold night. The forest seemed to pause. The figure remained, pale against dark bark. Its presence made the mist heavier. Each step I took felt measured. Watched, the silence pressed against my ears, filling me with anticipation. I noticed the ground around it. No footprints, no disturbance, as if it had always been part of the forest, yet entirely separate. The wind stirred slightly. I heard leaves rustle, faint and dry, but the figure did not sway. It remained fixed, a pale shadow amidst shifting darkness. I inched closer, drawn by curiosity and dread. The fog wrapped around my arms, cold and damp. It whispered against my skin, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and decay. The figure's edges seemed to blur, yet the stillness remained unnerving. I tried to blink it away. It lingered, a presence both fragile and impossible. I could feel my heart beating faster, yet it did not startle. The forest seemed alive around it. Shadows stretched unnaturally, weaving in and out of the fog. The pale figure remained constant, like a heartbeat in the mist. I whispered a name. No answer, not even a movement. Yet I felt a weight in the space between us, a quiet attention pressing against my chest. The fog thickened. It clung to my skin, wrapping me in silence. The figure did not shift, did not breathe. It simply existed, pale and unwavering, watching. I took a cautious step back. The earth beneath me creaked faintly. A branch snapped somewhere distant, echoing through the mist. Still, the figure did not move. I felt drawn, compelled to look again. Its presence was impossible to turn from, neither friend nor foe, simply a pale shadow within the living forest. I exhaled slowly. The fog swirled, hiding the trees behind me. When I blinked, it seemed slightly closer. I could not tell if it had moved. The night held its breath with me. The figure lingered, soft and pale, anchored in the mist yet untouchable. I stepped back once more, each leaf and twig whispering beneath my boots. I left it there, among the trees, waiting, silent, unblinking, a presence that neither faded nor fled. And the forest held me, alone with its fog, its hum, its shadows, and the pale shadow that never moved, never blinked, never left. The night was thick with fog, heavy and damp. Every tree stood like a sentinel, branches scraping faintly against each other. The ground smelled of wet earth, sharp and cold beneath my boots. I paused. A rustle of leaves, soft and deliberate, brushed against my ears. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then it came, a warmth against the nape of my neck. Heavy, breathing, not mine. I froze. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I felt the heat linger, a pulse in the cool night air. When I turned, nothing met my eyes, only fog, curling in pale tendrils around the trees. It carried the scent of moss, decay, and something sour I could not name. My own breath sounded loud, harsh, rasping against quiet. The feeling returned, closer this time. A weight of air pressing against me, brushing my hair, my shoulders. The forest seemed to hum with it, alive with static tension. I took a step back. The leaves beneath me whispered in reply. The fog shifted. I spun around, still empty. My heart thudded. Each beat a drum against the silence. The cold pressed in, but the breath, it was warm, unnerving. I whispered my own name. The forest swallowed it instantly. No reply, but the presence remained, patient and heavy. I moved again, careful, slow. Branches clawed softly at my jacket. The scent lingered, sour and thick. I could feel it following, though I could see nothing. I stopped, and so did it. The air stilled. The fog wrapped closer, a shivering veil that I swallowed. A faint rustle answered me. Leaves shifted, unseen feet beneath. I felt a shadow in the corner of my vision, gone the moment I blinked. Each step I took echoed too loudly in my skull. The warmth on my neck faded, only to return with every pause. It was patient, waiting. The forest seemed infinite, yet intimate. Every sound amplified, the hum of insects, the distant snap of a twig, my own shaky breath. Yet nothing moved but the fog, curling around the trunks like smoke. I tried to convince myself it was the wind, but the warmth, the weight, the timing, it mirrored me. It knew me. I slowed, letting the silence fold around me. The fog thickened, clinging to skin and clothing, a cold mist in my hair, a dampness in my gloves. And still, behind me, the heat lingered. I exhaled slowly. The forest remained still, but for the soft rustling of leaves. I could not hear it moving, but I felt its breath. Heavy, patient. I stepped forward. The ground yielded underfoot, soft mud sucking at boots. The fog wrapped tighter, whispering faintly in my ears. I sensed it behind me. A pause. Then the weight lifted. The warmth vanished, leaving only the chill of night. Silence returned, broken by my own harsh breath. I did not turn again. The fog swirled. The forest held its secrets close. And I walked, alone, with the memory of a breath that wasn't mine, lingering like a shadow along the nape of my neck. The forest fell silent. So complete it hummed, a low vibration under my skin. Mist curled around tree trunks, pale and sticky against my hands. I breathed in. The air smelled of damp pine, wet earth, and something metallic faint beneath. Each exhale sounded far too loud. I stepped forward. Leaves shifted underfoot, but the rustle felt swallowed by the thick quiet. Even my heartbeat echoed strangely, reverberating in the empty spaces. I paused. A shiver ran along my spine. The fog clung, heavy, hiding shapes that might not be there. Shadows pulled in corners of the trees, still and watchful. The silence pressed closer. It hummed faintly in my ears, vibrating through bones, under my skin. I could feel the forest breathing around me. Yet no leaf moved, no branch snapped, no wind whispered. I whispered my own name. It returned, delayed, hollow, like the trees repeated it slowly. My words sounded foreign, twisted. The fog seemed to swallow them, then give them back in strange echoes. I moved again, careful, each footfall cautious, soft against the cold, wet dirt. The mist brushed my cheeks, damp and cool. I smelled the damp decay of fallen leaves and the faint iron tang of mud. I tried to focus on the familiar, a gnarled branch, a patch of frost, a distant tree trunk. But the forest had other plans. Shadows stretched and contracted, flickering in the pale light. The hum thickened. It pressed in, filling my skull, vibrating against my teeth. I stopped. The stillness was almost unbearable. Even my breathing sounded intrusive, a betrayal to quiet. Something moved, or maybe it didn't. A shimmer in the mist, pale and slow, like heat rising off stone. I blinked and it vanished. I could feel eyes, unseen, glinting somewhere between the trunks. The echoes grew. My thoughts, my memories, whispered back to me in ways they never had before. A word I didn't say seemed to linger in the air. A laugh, soft and dry, brushed the edge of my mind. I swallowed. The taste of cold metal filled my mouth. Fog pressed closer, wet against my arms, heavy in my hair. I shivered. I walked, step by careful step, trying to keep my senses tethered. Every shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. Every silence stretched longer than it should. I paused again. The hum was constant now, thrumming in my chest. I could feel it in the soles of my feet, vibrating up through bone and muscle. I tried to move quietly, but each step sounded like a drumbeat in a cathedral of stillness. The mist shifted. I smelled earth, rotting leaves, and something else. Something wrong, sharp and lingering. I could feel it brushing my ankles, soft and deliberate. No one was there. I breathed. The fog coiled around my neck, my wrists, my hair. It hummed with the silence. I could hear my own heartbeat again, slower now, amplified in the empty spaces. I turned. Nothing moved. The trees were still. The shadows pooled and folded in pale light. The forest seemed to watch, patient and endless. I walked on. The hum softened, receding into the distance behind me. The echoes of my own thoughts followed, distorted, repeating. The fog clung still, sticky and cold, carrying the scent of damp pine and shadow. The forest remained silent, but I knew it was alive in ways I could not see. It held me, waited, and whispered without words. I took another step. The ground gave slightly under my weight. Leaves rustled faintly. And I realized, finally, I was not alone. The silence flickered, and I moved forward, unsure if I was walking into it or if it was walking into me. The fog hung thick, cold and damp against my skin. Each breath I drew tasted of wet earth and decaying leaves. The forest seemed to hold its breath with me. I moved slowly. Soft footsteps pressed into the moss, quiet, careful. And I knew. Something mirrored me, always just behind. The shape was never clear. It shifted with the fog, bending in pale light. Sometimes tall, sometimes low. It matched my pace without effort. I whispered my own name. It did not answer, but I felt in the air, heavy, waiting. The mist pressed closer, clinging to my clothes, my hair. I tried to look away. Branches glinted wet with frost. Shadows pooled between the trees, dark and patient. The forest was alive with subtle sound. Leaves shivered as if touched by an unseen hand. A low hum thrummed through the air, vibrating in my chest. I stopped. The shadows stopped. And then I realized the forest had become a mirror of my fear. Every motion, every pause, felt reflected back, warped and delayed. I swallowed. The fog smelled faintly metallic, sharp against the damp earth. My heartbeat drummed too loud, filling the empty spaces around me. I moved again, step by careful step, avoiding twigs, damp leaves. The shape followed, gliding, slipping between trunks, never fully seen. Panic rose, slow and cold. I turned my head slightly, catching in the corner of my eye, a blur, pale against the fog, stretching impossibly, bending toward me. I tried to speak. My voice was swallowed instantly, muffled by thick air. The shadows seemed to ripple, smudge into fog, then reappear closer. The silence between sounds grew oppressive. I could feel it watching, patient and endless. Even my own movements echoed strangely, delayed, as if the forest repeated them. I breathed shallowly. The mist pressed against my face, wet and heavy, tasting faintly of iron. My hands shook as they brushed the rough bark of a tree. I stopped again. The shadow lingered, melding with fog and fractured light. It had no eyes, no form, yet I felt it everywhere. It waited, relentless, patient. I tried to walk faster. The forest seemed to stretch, paths curling back on themselves. Each step brought me nowhere, yet it stayed just behind. The hum deepened, vibrating through my bones. It felt like the earth itself was holding the shadow for me. I could not escape it. I paused once more. The fog thickened, swirling, hiding shapes in every direction. The shadow pressed against the edges of perception, a smear of light and dark. I whispered, barely audible, a soft intake of breath in return, or was it mine reflected back? The line between me and the shape blurred, impossibly thin. I moved on, slower now, step by hesitant step, trying to blend into the mist, into the silence. But I knew I would always feel it behind me, always in the corner of my vision. The forest held its quiet. Leaves rustled faintly, brushing against my ankles. Fog clung, cold and heavy, and I walked forward, knowing the shadow would follow, always merging with fog, with light, with the air around me, relentless, patient, unseen, and utterly inescapable. The fog pressed down, thick and wet, filling every space between the trees. I could taste it on my lips, cold and earthy, clinging to my hair. The forest seemed to inhale along with me, slow and endless. I stepped carefully, boots sinking slightly into damp moss. No fire to guide me, no flashlight to cut through the gray. Only my own soft footsteps, swallowed immediately by the fog. Branches brushed my arms. Leaves clung to my clothes, cold and sticky. Every shadow felt like it was watching, though nothing moved. I stopped. The air hummed faintly, static running through the silence. The fog shifted, curling around my legs, my shoulders. I realized I could no longer see where I began or ended. The trees leaned close, heavy with moisture. Their roots knotted like veins through the soil. I was no longer walking through the forest. It was folding around me, swallowing me whole. A soft rustle echoed somewhere nearby. Or maybe it was only the movement of the fog against itself. My breath came loud in my ears, sharp and shallow. The cold seeped through my skin. I pressed my palms against the bark of a tree, rough and wet. It felt alive, connected, part of me. I tried call out. My voice vanished instantly, absorbed into the damp air. The silence answered, patient, unmoving. Step by slow step, I moved forward. The fog thickened with each motion, a pale tide of gray and white. I no longer felt separate from it. It flowed around me, inside me, as if I had always been part of this place. The leaves whispered faintly against one another. A static hum lingered, low and vibrating through the soil. I bent down, touching the cold earth. It smelled of moss, of rot, of rainwater pooling unseen. I walked, but there was no path, no direction, only the forest, pressing close and intimate. I realized my own footsteps were meaningless here. The fog erased them, folding them into itself. I paused. The trees stretched tall above, their gnarled branches forming patterns I could not name. Pale light filtered through, diffuse and soft, and I felt it touch my skin like breath. I was alone, and yet not alone. The forest hummed, a vibration that was both beneath my feet and in my chest. I could feel it in the very marrow of my bones. I exhaled slowly. The fog accepted me. The trees accepted me. I lowered my head. The air tasted damp, metallic, and alive. I ran my fingers through the mist, and it clung, cool and persistent. Every sense told me the same truth. I was part of this place now. No fire to warm me. No flashlight to guide me. No footsteps of my own, fading endlessly into fog. The silence pulsed around me, thick, heavy, humming, alive. I breathed with it, moved with it, became it. The fog swirled at my feet. It rose slowly, curling around my shoulders, around my hair. Every branch, every leaf, every inch of earth felt familiar. I was no longer walking through the forest. I was a forest. And finally, I stopped resisting. The cold pressed closer. The mist held me, and I realized I had nowhere to go, nowhere to run. I was home, alone in the fog, yet utterly, completely not alone.